Welcome to the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show, where cutting-edge science meets innovation and practical application for everyone. In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Faidon Magkos. Now, you may not have heard of him because he is not on social media. And in fact, he is one of the most well-published, well-researched, well-respected metabolic experts in the nutritional science and exercise physiology space. He is a full professor at Copenhagen, and he is in the Department of Nutritional Sciences. He has also published some of the most well-respected hallmark studies. In this episode, we discuss the true cause of obesity. Both sides. You've heard about calories in, calories out, and you've also heard about the carbohydrate-insulin model. Faidon, Dr. Faidon, breaks it down from two sides of the coin, both perspectives, to bring you the commonalities and the differences. Now, join me in this conversation with Dr. Faidon Magkos. Faidon Magkos, we go way back. And you laughed at me, and I said, Faidon, we've been friends for over 10 years.
Yeah, that's about right.
That is about right. You are a professor in obesity and metabolism at the Department of Nutrition, Exercise, and Sports at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, which, by the way, your flat looks amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It's really interesting because I met you at WashU. You were a professor at WashU. You let's see, there's Harvard Medical School here. You have published over 200 papers, with their impact factor of an average of 6.3. H index is 54. And for those who are not academics, basically I'm talking to a genius.
Thank you. Probably those who are not academics, they believe you. So,
but you said something to me that really struck me, and I'm sure you don't remember this, but I would normally say this would embarrass you, but it's not going to embarrass you because probably most things don't. But you said to me something that I've taken with me for over 10 years. And you said, when you are average or mediocre, nobody cares about what you're doing. Do you remember saying that? But when you are great, people have these expectations. So how I took that was basically, if you're functioning at a level and not producing and not providing, it's kind of like, great, whatever. But when you are exceptional, there's a lot of criticism and there is a lot of focus on your work. Do you remember telling me that? Is that a fundamental belief?
I honestly don't, but it sounds about right.
And you do not have a Instagram, YouTube channel, or probably not even a Twitter account. But
I do not. Yeah, I do not. I typically don't disseminate my research in those channels. So this is an exception.
Well, I feel very special, and you didn't really have a choice but to say yes. There was no choice. And if someone were to Google your name, they will find a ton of citations. They will find a ton of papers. But I do want to mention that the quality of these papers, these are hallmark papers. They are they're literature that has moved the field of obesity in ways that is so meaningful. And I don't know if anyone has ever said thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that you're too kind, but thank you so much for your kind words. Some papers are better than others. That's the reality, right?
Here's how I've been using AG1 with my unsweet Texas tea and half a shot of ketones. I have to tell you, I feel really good about that kind of decision. AG1 covers what I lack in my diet. It comes from whole food sources that are synergistic. It is the difference between eating components of a stew, for example, rather than the entire cooked stew itself. AG1 has vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, and bioactive ingredients from whole foods like citrus bioflavonoids. The synergy of the parts amplifies the effectiveness of AG1. It contains prebiotics, probiotics, gut supporting ingredients. In fact, in a research study, 97% of participants felt digestion improved after 90 days of drinking AG1. In another clinical trial, AG1 was shown to increase healthy bacteria in the gut by 2.9 times. AG1's formula takes a dual approach, supporting the gut microbiome and also overall health and wellness. I know because I feel it myself. What I love about AG1 is that it has a commitment to research and furthering the science around nutrition and gut health. AG1 uses research-backed ingredients, and they even take it a step further by conducting multiple research studies on the complete formula. They continuously publish their findings, curated across many disciplines, and are deep in the research, testing, validation. Now, it's a great first step to investing in your health, and that's why I'm so excited to be partnering with them. Try AG1 and get a bottle of vitamin D3 K2 free and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe at drinkag1.com/lion. That's a $48 value for free if you go to drinkag1.com/Dr. Lion. Check it out. And I was so excited to see this paper. I'm sorry, it's not a paper. This is a perspective. It's a perspective piece. And this was published August 2024 in Nature Metabolism, and it's on the pathogenesis of obesity, causal models, and missing pieces of the puzzle. You are the first author. In this perspective piece, there are really juggernauts. Got Kevin Hall. We have, Arnie Astroff. The list goes on. And basically, I want to know why you wrote it. I mean, why did you take this beast of a perspective on, and what was the perspective? And by the way, I know it, but hearing it from you is way more interesting.
Yeah, I get you. I mean, just to give you a little bit of a background, back in 2023, like in the fall of 2023, the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which is a research foundation that we have here in Denmark, they took the initiative of putting together a 2-day workshop in Copenhagen. And they invited people who have very different perspectives on the pathogenesis of obesity from all around the world. And of course, there is a lot of different ideas and thoughts and models and hypotheses about how obesity develops. But they kind of chose the two most popular ones or predominant ones, let's put it this way. So they invited everybody to Copenhagen. It was about 15 or 16 people, pretty much as many authors as you see in that paper. And during these 2 days, we had a lot of interesting discussions. Some of them were more heated than others. There was a lot of agreement, much more disagreement. So at the end of that workshop, we kind of thought that it would be a good idea to summarize, what came out of this. I mean, did we spend those days in a meaningful way? Did we manage to achieve anything, or did we just go to a very nice place that Novo Foundation kind of rented for us, and we just wasted our time pretty much, because generally speaking, scientists tend to support their hypothesis quite a lot. So it's always difficult to have people with very different perspectives and ideas to kind of get together and discuss in a way that is also very open, easygoing, and transparent, right? Because that was not a conference, so nobody really had to defend anything.
And I have to say, to interject, you've played a huge role in the way that I think. I don't know if you know that, but I'm sure you do, because I do call you freaking out on numerous occasions. And you always say to me, number one, science is a science of uncertainty.
Yes, absolutely.
And you always challenge me. Why muscle? Why this?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. When we say in science, in our research, that something is happening, we always say that with a certain level of being uncertain, which means that It might not always happen this way, and it might not always happen for everybody in the same way, right? So going back to the workshop, I consider myself relatively. I mean, nobody can really be completely neutral, right, in this debate. But I'm one of the people who kind of understand the arguments from both ends, and then I took on the task of putting all these discussions into a paper that everybody would agree on, and then getting it out there for the public to kind of read.
And
And
what
this,
are, oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm sure you're going to tell us the arguments and why.
well, I was about to tell you the process. So it took us many months and drafts and back and forth, because everybody needs to be to agree on the final version of the paper and on the actual words, not just the meaning, but we had back and forth in terms of trying to find the correct words to portray what these people believe and agree on. So that task was not particularly easy. So it was one of the more difficult papers for me in terms of getting together all the authors to agree on writing a paragraph. And sometimes it took us forever to write a paragraph. But thankfully, it all culminated in a nice paper that was published well, and now it's out there.
And give us the overarching themes of what people disagree on, what people agree on it. And this really was, what is the cause of obesity? Is this a energy balance issue? Is this a carbohydrate insulin issue? And I have to say, looking at the authors, when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. As you had mentioned, you have Kevin Hall, you have David Ludwig. There are people that have drastically different views. And um, they're all very well respected.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. There's no question about this. And if you look individually at in the literature, there is evidence to support arguments on both ends, right? I mean, that's the reality of human research. But going back to the two different ideas or two different models, let's say that these two camps represent. One of them is, I would say, the one that we were all pretty much brought up with, and the one that we are or more or less familiar with, which is the energy balance model. And what this hypothesis states is that obesity generally develops as a result of people eating more food, more calories than the amount of calories that they burn, right? And the main reason why this happens is that the modern food environment, predominantly the modern food environment and the characteristics of the modern food supply, what they do is that they facilitate overeating below the level of your conscious awareness. So you eat more without even realizing it, right? So that's the general idea. So the excess calories, regardless of whether you eat more carbs or more fat or more protein, when you do not burn them, the body typically eventually tends to convert them and store them as fat, right?
Yes.
So you have an expansion of adipose tissue. So in the energy balance model, overeating or positive energy balance precedes the adipose tissue expansion and the development of obesity. So that's what I would say most textbooks on dietetics and nutrition and obesity kind of portray as well.
And that's what we've all been taught,
All
largely.
right, correct. So to try to give you an analogy, right? Imagine that you go, let's say, in a Monday morning, you go with your car to the gas station and you put 10 gallons of gas, right? And then you take your car around, and as you go around, of course, you burn some of this gas, right? So at the end of the week, by Sunday night, you pretty much are empty. So the next Monday morning, you put again 10 gallons of gas, and that goes on and on. But on every Sunday night, you are always at zero. So you are always empty, right? So you are in an energy balance in this case. But imagine now that you decide to change gas station, right? And this new pump that they are using, it kind of works a little bit in your favor, meaning that it reads that you are dispensing 10 gallons, but in reality, you are dispensing 11. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now you go around your daily life and do whatever you do during the course of the week. But now at the end of the week, on Sunday night, you are left with 1 gallon in the tank, right? Now you think, however, that you are left with nothing. So next morning you put again another 10 gallons of gas, as you think, but in reality another 11. So, if this goes on, you accumulate 1 gallon of gas every week. So,
and this gallon is fat, or this gallon, we're talking about fat? Or we're talking about calories?
correct. If you do not, let's say, strive to do something with physical activity, most of the excess calories are being stored as fat. Nonetheless, as the time goes on and your weight increases, imagine this as a form of passive training. So obesity is also associated with an increase in lean mass and muscle mass, because you need the additional muscle to carry the much more weight of your body, right? So most of the weight gain is fat, but part of it is lean mass and muscle.
Lean mass and muscle, but that, and I'm just going to mention this, and you and I certainly discuss this, it doesn't necessarily reflect the health of that tissue.
Absolutely, but I will get back to that. We can get back to that, but this is the energy balance model, and the idea is that because of the food supply has changed, and now we have these ultra processed foods which are calorie dense, and they have a lot of other ingredients in them that kind of mask or saturate the ability of our brain to understand how much we eat. That's the general idea. So it all starts with eating more than what you need in the energy balance model. And then the end result is an expansion of adipose tissue and obesity.
And muscle.
Correct, and muscle to some extent. So also energy expenditure goes up along these lines, right? So the total energy expenditure of the body goes up simply because you have a larger body right now. So for any sort of activity you do, you burn more calories, right? Now, the other model that is, let's say, the contender is the carbohydrate-insulin model of obesity, right? And that model suggests that the primary defect is not really the brain that does not understand how much you eat, but it's something that happens in your body, in the peripheral organs, say in the liver or in the adipose tissue or the skeletal muscle. So the handling of the incoming nutrients and the incoming food is changed, and is changed in the way that you cannot utilize all the calories that you ingest for doing all sorts of things that you want to do, right? To put it back in the analogy of the car, let's assume now that the pump is functioning correctly. So you put in 10 gallons, but the tubes that transfer the gas or the fuel from your tank to the engine, they have leaks. So you cannot take advantage of all the fuel that you entered in your car. Right?
So it's
Does
almost
it make
as if
sense?
the chicken or the egg, what came first? Are we over consuming food and then getting an increase in adipose tissue, right? It would be considered hyperplasia. Would that be considered hyperplasia, or?
Well, hyperplasia and hypertrophy refer to two characteristics, ways by which tissues typically increase and grow.
Yeah.
Hyperplasia is that I am making more cells. And if we are talking about adipose tissue hyperplasia, then you will make more adipocytes, so the number of cells increases. Hypertrophy meaning that it means that the cells themselves grow bigger, right?
And is that what happens when someone?
Typically both happen in obesity, although hypertrophy is more pronounced. So typically you develop larger adipocytes rather than more cells when you develop obesity in your adult life. But going back now to the carbohydrate insulin model, so what this suggests is that since your body cannot, let's say, take advantage of all the calories that you just ate, it signals to the brain and it tells your brain that, you know what, I need more food, right? Even if you have it in your body, but you just can't utilize it. So the brain then, what it does is that it tells you that you either need to burn less, so it will make your energy expenditure lower to match what you have or what you think you have, or most commonly, it will make you overeat. So in the carbohydrate insulin model, the causal chain is reversed, meaning that you start first from depositing more of the ingested calories into fat, and then this leads you to overeat,
I see.
right?
I see.
So in the carbohydrate insulin model, it's something that happens in your periphery that then signals the brain to eat more. Whereas in the energy balance model is quite the opposite, right? The first eat more, and then you deposit those calories into fat.
I see.
And as you mentioned, the chicken and the egg, that's something that is extremely difficult to dissect in humans, right? Because we would have to take people who have normal body weight and then perhaps overfeed them for a prolonged period of time until they become obese and see what comes first, right? But this is not possible in humans to do. The best model that we have so far for weight gain and obesity is these overfeeding studies where we experimentally feed people more than what they need. But this is typically a very large extent of overfeeding. So let's say we feed them 1,000 or 2,000 calories per day more than what they need for a few weeks, right? That's not typically how obesity develops. Nobody goes to bed being lean and wakes up the next morning being obese. Typically, obesity develops by, at least that's what we think, is by eating a few more calories than what you need on a daily basis for years. So we do not have really a very good model for human obesity in research.
We don't. I want to restate that because many of us who are not academics, and as you know, well, you might not know because you're not on the social media circuit or sphere, but there's a lot of information out there. And the discussion is stated in ways that it seems as if these are absolutes, that this is, we'll review literature and then you'll have influencers or scientific educators then speak to the public. And a fundamental concept is that I think it's important to highlight is we don't actually have a good model of obesity to study. And the foundation of the work is built on the best that we could do. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and I would say so one thing with the social media and the influencers and all these arena is that but you have to always defend or try to convince people why things are not necessarily as stated in the social media. You know what I mean? And that's a little bit tiring.
Explain to me a little bit more. I
What I
agree
mean,
with you.
so there is a lot of the new trends and the fads and the diets that come up from time to time stem, for instance, from studies in animals or from a single study in humans, and their results are very good because they are very good to make a headline, but nobody really digs deeply to understand the limitations of the study. What does one study mean? Nothing really, right? There is no definitive study. Research in humans, at least, or generally speaking, science, you have to consider every study as a little brick, and we are trying to build a building. So if you take a brick and you focus on that brick and you tell me, look, the story that brick tells you, it's really relevant for the whole building, right? So that's kind of the analogy that I try to give to my students as well when it comes to a single study versus understanding what the whole literature shows. And now, coming back to obesity in humans, for instance, right? To give you an example, in the overfeeding studies, we are very successful. We take people in the lab, we can overfeed them, we can make them gain 5-10 kilos, right? But remarkably, when we send them home and the study is finished, the majority of them, within a few months, lose that additional excess weight effortlessly, without even doing anything, according to their, testimonials. So this is completely different to the model, to the real obesity that we have in real life, where people struggle to lose weight, right?
Yes.
So how good of a model that is? Probably not so good. And of course, there is not even a point in discussing the animal studies, because then
those
that's
are,
also a different species, right? Completely different.
and whether you're ad libitum feeding them, it
Yeah,
is
so it's
quite
very
confusing.
easy to pick up the results, to cherry pick and make a story. That's not a difficult thing, to cherry pick different findings and make a story. What is difficult is to say that, okay, if all of these, let's say, magical diets or reasons why we get obese and why we lose weight and don't lose weight, if these were true, we would have solved the problem already. We wouldn't have obesity, but we still do have obesity, and we are very much unsuccessful in treating it.
Okay, you guys know I'm always on the lookout for ways to improve my immunity and gut health. And I've been using Armra colostrum in my coffee to further strengthen my gut health. Now, why colostrum? Because it is the first nutrition we receive in life and contains all the essential nutrients our bodies need to grow strong. Now, why Armra? Because it is a live product. It has 400 or so living bioactive nutrients that build the barriers of your body through your digestive health. And it has research-backed health benefits. Armra is a premium bovine colostrum concentrate, and unlike any other product on the market, is sustainably sourced from colostrum from grass-fed cows based in the US dairy farms. And unlike most colostrums, which use heat pasteurization that depletes nutrient potency, Amra uses cold that purifies and preserves the integrity of hundreds of these bioactive nutrients while removing casein and fat. It's very gentle on the stomach. My children use it. And as a sponsor, we've worked out a very special offer for my audience. Receive 15% off your first order. Go to tryamra/Dr. Lyon and get 15% off your first order. That's TRYARMRA.com/Dr. Lyon. I want to ask you a question, and I want your opinion. Now, notice I said your opinion, or maybe your informed opinion. Why do you think we have obesity?
Well, I would say that as neutral as I try to be, I think that the major factor is that food is nice and eating is really it's an enjoyable activity, right?
For you,
And for pretty much everybody, I would say. And the fact that the modern food supply helps you overeat. So you eat a slice of pizza or a hamburger, and that's 500 calories. If you eat it in vegetables and fruit, that will be a bucket of fruit, right? Or vegetables. And volume, so energy density is a major factor. But there is a lot of other reasons why we eat food. So eating in humans is not just a homeostatic response, meaning that it's not just when my brain understands that I don't have enough energy and I go and eat. I mean, in Copenhagen, to give you an idea, I'm running in the mornings. And in the mornings, all the bakeries are baking their, croissants and bread and da-da-da. And I love carbs.
yeah.
I,
I
I,
have to
I
tell people.
struggle to not stop and just not go in and just eat something, right? And
Yes.
I know better, but what I'm trying to say with this example is that there is a whole lot of other sociocultural factors that drive eating behavior in humans.
And let's say
And
we
it's
were to take that out, though. And for those of you listening, or I'm really hoping you get to watch this because I've never seen Faidon wear a suit ever. Uh, I've seen him wear lots of t-shirts and running shorts. He will run for hours and then would go to the store, Straub's, and get an entire baguette. And I would call him, and he would be sitting there eating the entire huge loaf of bread. And him and I would go back and forth about, do you need carbohydrates? Could someone just eat protein? And, you know, one of the other things is, and I don't want to get too off track, but I do want to have you be humanized. You are an incredible researcher. And even you, with all of this knowledge, it's not so cut and dry. And when I think about these two competing ideas, this energy balance or carbohydrate insulin model, I wonder, when did these first when was there an idea that perhaps there was an emergence of two models?
Hmm. Well, as I said at the beginning, Gabrielle, there is more than two, right? So there are theories that obesity develops because of viruses. There are also theories that obesity develops because of environmental contaminants, right? And that may well be relevant. Um, to give you an example, there is evidence that the basal metabolic rate of humans, there is evidence that it has been decreasing over the past 100 years. 100 years is much prior to the emergence of the obesogenic environment, as we call it today, right? And the McDonald's and the fast food chain. So we're talking about back to 1910. So
And there was no change in activity. This is
well, I would
irrespective
say, I
of.
mean, of course, going back and looking into what happened historically, the quality of the data that we have is not so good. But I would say that the majority of evidence would suggest that up until maybe the 60s, 70s, there has been decreases in activity levels simply because of the industrialization and the changing in the type of jobs that we do. From the 60s, 70s onwards, I don't think that there has been so much change because focus also has been put on having people do more leisure time physical activity. And you have to also remember that it depends on, so if you are bigger, you burn more calories. So maybe the reduction in the level of activity is counterbalanced to some extent by the increase in our body weight, which burns more calories, right? But what I want to say by that is that there is evidence that our metabolism has been changing way before the obesogenic transformation of society, where we start blaming the modern food for all the bads and all the obesity and all the diseases that have been happening.
Is it possible then, if we were to think about and expand a larger view, the carbohydrate insulin model, energy balance model, these are the ones that are most robustly discussed. You mentioned environmental contaminants. We do see this in my clinical practice. We do see environmental contaminants, to what degree these environmental contaminants play a role. I can speculate. There seems to be a disruption in potentially thyroid regulation. We do see these contaminants, and to what the mechanism is. I remember that I'll just give you an example is that I had a military family, a commander who was living on a golf course, and his dog dramatically gained weight. And it was over, I mean, we are talking about this dog went from a normal lean animal to a very obese dog in a matter of 2 months. And it wasn't that he was changing anything, it was that he had actually gotten into some of the pesticides.
Okay, so he was not eating more. You mean he was being fed the same amount of food?
He was being fed the same amount of food, and it turned out that um, he had been exposed to all of these chemicals. He also lost vision in his
Yeah,
eye. There were
yeah,
other things that happened.
yeah. So one thing that is very, very possible is that all of these factors can operate in tandem, right? Or at the same time, meaning that some individuals may be more prone to the energy balance type of obesity, meaning that they tend to overeat. Some individuals, maybe because of genetics or other factors or where they live, as you say, may have problems with their peripheral metabolism and handling of the ingested food, and then the sim-like model may be more relevant. It is possible that more than one factors or model or contributing pathways account for obesity in different individuals.
Mm. And would you say that there are other models before we go back to this perspective paper that maybe we're going to begin to hear more about?
Well, about the fact that you can, even if you identify the cause of obesity, removing that cause doesn't mean that you're going to treat obesity, right?
That is
And
a
vice versa.
challenging way to think about it, though, because if, for example, if excess calories, if that was the cause of obesity, and then you remove the excess calories, one should be able to treat it. No?
Well, not necessarily, because if, let's say, the alterations that or the adaptations that have happened in the body in the obese state are resistant to change, then this does not necessarily mean that you will be able to treat obesity effectively. Meaning that physiology is not linear, right? That's something that happens in pretty much all physiological responses. Our body doesn't respond linearly to increases or decreases in a stimulus such as calorie intake.
Where do you think the divergent pathways came from? People historically focused on this energy balance model, then somebody must have had an opposing view.
Yeah. So I think that, evidence, or at least focus on the amount of calories that we eat being responsible for obesity, dates back maybe to the early 1900s, 1910 or 1920. There were booklets about, calorie counting. So the focus on calories was there over 100 years ago, I would say. So, that's where I can identify the root of the energy balance model. Now, the carbohydrate-insulin model kind of emerged from the realization that all efforts that we do to try to treat obesity by energy restriction don't really work.
In the science, in the randomized control trials?
Yes. So, in randomized control trials, you can have people lose weight for the first maybe, 3, 6, 9 months. Then they reach a plateau, and then they just start regaining weight, even though you're still supposedly trying to calorie restrict them. So, the body is very, very good in defending that obesity. We don't lose weight so easily. So the body perceives that as a threat, I would say. But, starting from that realization that if energy balance is correct, then by removing the excess calorie, we should lose weight, right? And if this doesn't work, then something else must be happening. And that something else is what eventually led to the formulation of the carbohydrate-insulin model. And I would say that at least some indication that calories may not be the culprit dates back to the 40s, 50s, or something like that. But as a model, the carbohydrate-insulin model was formulated relatively recently, maybe the past 20 years or so.
You may have seen myself, my family using red lights and infrared heating mats and pads. Okay, so we use products from BonCharge, which is a holistic wellness brand with a huge range of products to optimize your life in every way. It's founded on science and it's inspired by nature. All BonCharge products adopt ancestral ways of living in our modern day world, which I love. And I feel that balancing our highly industrialized lifestyle is critical for overall health. It is super easy to add in red light panels to your routine, travel lights, clip on your computer, or the red light lamp. My new favorite product is their blue light blocking clip. Red light can help with sleep and energy, recovery, the list goes on. For me, right now, I'm using it to balance my indoor time. I use the blue light blocking lamp as soon as it gets dark outside, and of course, the larger panels for 10 to 20 minutes each day. BonCharge has the lowest EMF on the market, and its quality is incredible. In fact, I might just be gifting it to all my friends this holiday season. There's a 12-month warranty on all red light therapy devices. Go to boncharge.com/Dr. Lyon and use the code Dr. Lyon to save 15% off. That's BONCHARGE.com/Dr. Lyon. And that still, it's interesting when you speak to some scientists. So if you look at these two groups that were there, these two groups that were curated, I'm assuming it was intentional. It was intentional to bring experts in both perspectives together.
Of course, yes, absolutely.
And you'll hear many scientists say, well, the carbohydrate insulin model, that's been disproven. And What would you say to that?
Well, as I said, it's very difficult to prove or disprove something in humans, right? So how do you prove the energy balance model? How do
Are
we,
there,
we should take people who have normal body weight, put them somewhere in a hotel, isolated, right? And then try to have or to mimic the normal food environment where there's all these ultra processed foods and all those things, and then keep them there for years, right?
yes.
Happens.
And
And then have another control group where they would be in another hotel where the food resembles the minimally perhaps or low little processed food that we had in the beginning of the previous century. So these studies are impossible to do. And of course, when I say isolated, you have to think, as I mentioned, obesity has a very strong sociocultural component, right? Because I remember when we were doing studies, you remember at WSU that we had some TVs in these rooms, and
I was
all
just
people
having
were,
flashbacks to the metabolic ward, the unit.
yeah.
We should have.
You remember that all these people were watching the Food Network
I
doing
know. Did you
these
guys do that on
studies. Yeah.
purpose?
So what I mean is that the influencers, the amount of advertisements, what you see, this is impossible to replicate in a controlled environment and see what is the effect of that on eating, right? So in the same way that I cannot answer you whether the carbohydrate-insulin model has been disproven, I can also not answer whether the energy balance model has been proven, right? Because what does disproving mean? I mean, people would say that, let's say, if you give people a low carb, low GI diet and they don't lose weight, that kind of disproves the carbohydrate insulin model. But the reality is that all our diet intervention studies are either too short or they have too little intensity, right? And the reason, of course, is feasibility and funding. Just to give you an idea, when you test weight loss drugs, for each person that we recruit in a study, we spend about $40,000-$50,000. In weight loss studies with diet, exercise, and these lifestyle behaviors, we spend about $2,000. So we just can't do these studies so far, at least in humans, in a way that it will be a definitive answer to whether this works or the other thing works.
Have there been particular hallmark studies that we can pull information from? I think it was the ABC trial.
In humans, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that well, on the energy balance side, right? The Kevin Hall's group, they have this setup where they actually have some sort of a hotel-like clinical research center where they can actually control the food supply with vending machines, and they keep people isolated. And they have compared in a randomized design what happens when you put people in vending machines that offer only ultra processed food versus vending machines that offer only minimally processed food or stuff like that. And they have generally seen that under ad libitum conditions, meaning that people were allowed to do and eat whatever they wanted, on the ultra processed food, they tended to eat a little bit more, right? And then they tended to gain weight. Of course, these are like 2-week studies, right? So what can 2 weeks tell you about obesity that develops over a time frame or a time scale of decades? It's very difficult to answer this question, unfortunately. So even the very well publicized studies, they in reality, they tell us very little. They give us an indication, but they tell us very little in terms of definitive proof.
And if you look at this this paper that you wrote, the key differences between the energy balance model and the carbohydrate insulin model, energy balance model, the causal direction is positive energy balance results in net fat deposition. And then the carbohydrate insulin model is altered fuel partitioning results in net fat deposition and then subsequently positive energy balance.
Correct. Because in the latter case, because you actually store more of the ingested nutrients as fat and you don't utilize them, let's say, to fuel your movement, your brain tells you that you need to eat more. I don't have enough energy to do what you want to do in your life. So that's why you overeat in that case.
And it's interesting because if I were to think, what are the components that these two models have in common? The primary dietary driver for both, for the energy balance model, is increased availability, which is clear, and marketing of a wide variety of inexpensive. These are the highly palatable foods that are high in portion size, fat, salt, sugar, low in protein and fiber. And then the carbohydrate-insulin model, it really points to carbohydrate-rich foods with a high glycemic index and fructose-rich beverages. The energy balance model, point of entry into the regulatory system is the brain versus the carbohydrate-insulin model being the periphery. And really the brain's response, which you had mentioned for the energy balance, is that there's a impaired appetite is not the right word, but an impaired response in the brain. And the carbohydrate insulin model seems to not have anything to do with the brain.
Yes. So in the energy balance model, the brain is really tricked, right, to not see how much you eat or to not understand how much food and energy you need.
Yeah.
So that's why the brain has a central focus in that model, because the characteristics of the food themselves or something else in the food environment or the non-food environment either saturates the ability of your brain to sense how much you eat and how much you need, or it kind of impairs it, right? On the other hand, the brain, the carbohydrate insulin model, is functioning very well. It's just that the brain in that case cannot see all the nutrients that you just ate. So it actually correctly tells you that you need to get something more because I cannot see it. Going back to the analogy with the tank, right? If you have a leak in the tubing that transports the fuel from your tank to your engine, then you will still have that fuel somewhere in your car, but you will not be able to use it. So you will be forced to actually put more gas next time.
Right. And you continue to eat.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to share with you guys a scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness. C15 is the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in, get this, 90 years. That was omega-3 fatty acids. You've heard of the freshman 15, but let's talk about something positive. Our primary source of C15 has long been whole fat dairy products. Unfortunately, I don't eat those. You might not either. And our C15 levels have gone down because many of us are eating a lot less of them. Additionally, our C15 levels naturally decline as we get older. Now, C15 works in a number of ways. It helps repair damaged cells. It may protect us from future breakdown, could potentially boost mitochondrial energy output, activates pathways in the body to help regulate sleep, mood, and natural repair mechanisms that, of course, support our overall health. Now, it ends up many of us are deficient in this saturated fat, C15, which results in obviously weaker cells, potentially less energy. Fatty 15, when you take it orally, is highly absorbable, and it can actually help with cellular repair. It is made from a patented pure oxidative resistant process. It is vegan friendly, no fillers, no allergens, no preservatives. It is 100% pure. Fatty 15 is on a mission to help you replenish your C15 levels and restore your long-term health. You can get an additional, get this, 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/Dr. Lyon and using the code DRLYON at checkout. And then the final difference, the final area in which this discussion rounds out is that the predicted changes in energy expenditure. for the energy balance model, it's increased at the whole body level, unaltered if adjusted for changes in body composition. So predicted change in energy expenditure, meaning how much energy you're going to burn. The energy balance model is it's increased at the whole body level. And then the carbohydrate-insulin model, and obviously please correct me where I state this incorrectly, is decreased energy expenditure is decreased if food intake does not increase. It's unchanged or even increased if food intake increases.
Correct. Let me just take a step back, right?
Thank you.
So in humans, there is a lot of evidence suggesting that our total energy expenditure, meaning the amount of calories that we burn, right, on a daily basis for maintaining, our basic metabolic and physiological functions, so our heart pumping blood, our lungs exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide, all of those things that maintain us alive are a function of body weight. The same thing is true for the calories that we burn with all sorts of weight-bearing activities, which for all intents and purposes are all sorts of exercises and physical activities that we do, right? Unless you are in space, for instance. But at least, running, cycling, walking, the amount of calories that we burn are a direct function of body weight. Okay. So the more body weight you carry with you, the more calories you burn. To understand that, think how easy it is to walk around in the gym and then grab two 20-pound dumbbells and walk around again. You can understand that it's a little bit more difficult. You're burning more calories as you carry more weight. So this is what the energy balance model tells you, that as you gain body fat and your weight becomes greater, then you start burning more calories. That's why energy expenditure, the total energy expenditure for the whole body goes up. However, if you take a piece of muscle tissue or a piece of liver tissue or a piece of adipose tissue, then the metabolic activity of that tissue per unit of mass is not altered. It's just that you have more of that tissue in your whole body that makes a greater energy expenditure. Does it make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Would one be able to argue, looking at the commonalities between this, that if we had a low energy environment, that would solve the problem? If we had limited access to food, versus let's say someone has a virus, but no access or environmental contaminants.
Yes, I will get back to that. That's a very good point, and I will get back to that. But just now to explain you what happens with energy expenditure in the carbohydrate-insulin model. So what the carbohydrate-insulin model tells you, remember, is that since your brain cannot see all the calories that we just ate, right? It tells you that you need to eat more. That's what it tells you. It drives you to eat more. If you do not act on that drive and you do not eat more, then the second option for the brain is to shut down your energy expenditure. So it will make you feel more tired, for example. So you will not go for a run. So that it will decrease your energy expenditure in order to match with the amount of calories or the amount of energy that your brain thinks you have available. That's why it decreases if you do not eat. But of course, in the modern environment, most people would eat. That's why most commonly the end result of the carbohydrate-insulin model is also overeating or positive energy balance. Let's put it this way. And going back, I'm sorry, no, let me now go back to what you just said. So there is no question. This is something that, of course, needs to be clear. No matter whether we are talking about genes, environment, type of food, amount of food, whether I am feeling good or bad or sad or happy, all of these factors that affect my drive to eat, they must manifest by a known biological mechanism that affect either energy intake or how I handle the food that I just ate. And you are correct. If I take people in the lab and I just remove their access to food, they lose weight as expected, right? Like textbook. So there is no magic there. But that is not something that we can do in humans, and it does not really prove that either model is correct.
What Were there any surprising points during this conversation? During this, would you call it a debate?
Yes, to some extent I would. I think what was surprising, actually satisfying to me, was to see these very good scientists come in the same room. And during, let's say, breakfast on day one, you could actually cut the tension with a knife. But I think that as the day progressed, and then as we had the second day, at the end of the workshop, everybody was so much better, and the environment and the climate was so much better. So for me, that was satisfying to see that that we can achieve that. Because as I said, as humans, as scientists, we also have our egos, and these are not easily these are not easy to kind of put on the side.
Were there any insights from either party? Because really, this debate between the energy balance model and carbohydrate-insulin model has really been robust within the scientific community. And the only way that we have any kind of mental flexibility is if we're willing to acknowledge or hear from the other side. Do you think, and also, is there a place where these two models work in tandem versus it's this or that?
Yeah. So I think that, if you also read the paper, a lot of the how the normal physiology and the normal regulation of energy intake and expenditure is regulated in humans, both models agree to that, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of overlap and a lot of agreement. It's just that it's not highlighted anywhere. But again, the both camps and everybody, I guess, no matter what kind of model they back, you have to agree that it will operate under known mechanisms of energy intake, energy expenditure, peripheral metabolism, and all the things that we know that operate in humans as a species. It's unlikely that you will find someone that will suggest something different. I think that the realization that they have actually a lot of points where the two models converge is something that the two camps also realized during the workshop, and that was a pleasure to see as well.
What was their big takeaway? That we need also longer human trials. What were the big takeaways?
So my feeling, first of all, is that even though they acknowledge that there is a possibility that, I may be wrong or something else may be happening, they went back home and they're still believing what they believe, right? And that's, we did not expect that something else would happen. But something that emerged from that workshop is that now that, we started having collaborative ideas and perhaps designing projects in common, right, to try to test some aspects of these models or some predictions of these models. There is no way that you can have a single study, as I said, that can prove or disprove one or the other. But at least now they are open to the possibilities, and that's a wonderful thing to see that it happens even at that level of science, which you would think that this is the norm, but it is not really the norm.
And you actually mentioned this in the paper. The paper mentions that the debate has often led to controversial discussions in both parties, in both scientific and popular media. And, you are a phenomenal scientist. I could speak with you for hours, which I do, but for the podcast particularly, I was so excited that you wrote this paper because, again, and I do want to touch on what you have seen in randomized controlled trials and some of the work that you have done in effective ways to lose weight. I want to discuss diet, exercise. I know we didn't really decide that we were going to do that before, but I do want to make sure that we have tangible items that people can take away. And you've done a tremendous amount of research.
So, of course, that's the reason why we are really interested in that. In what sense? No matter how obesity develops, right? People, or let's say the majority of individuals right now, are interested in trying to figure out ways to effectively lose weight, right? So it doesn't really matter how you put that weight on. Now you're interested in losing that weight.
It doesn't matter the speed. If we were to think about, and I just want to pause there, it's an interesting mental exercise. When it comes to obesity, doesn't matter the swiftness at which someone puts on weight. And the reason I ask this, because in my mind, I think that the distribution of fat would be variable over time. For example, if someone has been obese for an extended period of time, now you're not looking at just peripheral adiposity, but you're looking at intra-organ adiposity, and perhaps that might take longer to then course correct metabolic outcomes.
Yes. So one thing that I'm not sure how much known it is to the wider public is that perhaps during the past 20, 30 years, we have had a lot of evidence, and we realize that obesity or having excess weight and total body fat is not necessarily associated with metabolic abnormalities and metabolic disease and increased risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, right? And vice versa.
I have to push back on that.
I'm sorry?
So your students would never push back on that. So what you are mentioning here is a phenotype of obesity that would be metabolically healthy.
It's metabolically healthy relative to the majority of obesity. It's not the same as being lean and metabolically healthy, right?
Okay. What I want to say is that,
right. So what I want to say is that, right. So that if you just focus on body weight and total body fat, that doesn't tell you much in terms of risk of disease. That's what I want to, the point that I want to get across. And vice versa, you can have a normal body weight and a normal total body fat. But if you have accumulation of fat in specific locations around the body, then you can have increased risk of metabolic abnormalities. And this is the fat that typically people refer to as visceral fat, which is the fat that we have, let's say, around our bellies, but also fat that we can store in our muscle or in our livers or in our pancreases. And then that fat really affects the function of those organs, which are critical for metabolic homeostasis. And it is remarkable if you think that you can be a person with obesity, right, and a BMI of 40 or 50. So you can have 50 kilograms of extra fat in your body, but that doesn't necessarily tell you much as if you accumulate only, let's say, 5 kilograms as visceral adipose tissue or 200 grams of fat in your liver. This is remarkable. So the location of where you store that fat seems to be way more important for your metabolic health rather than the total amount of fat you have in your body. Now, why people tend to accumulate fat in this or that or in the third organ, it's something that we do not really know. Genes definitely affect or play a reason, but there are probably other reasons as well. So diet could be a reason. Exercise and physical activity habits definitely have a reason on body fat distribution, and they have a big role. So generally, yes, obesity itself is not necessarily associated with increased risk for disease.
And I think that there's a bit of a spectrum on that. Again, just to take it back, I was reading another paper, and one of the things is potentially it's on a continuum. We might not be identifying it. It's almost on a spectrum. So we might see an obese, quote, metabolically healthy person, but it's at that point in time. And I would argue that obesity is never going to be healthy. We might just not have the science yet to put into words. And, potentially it's just that the body is able to manage and mitigate negative outcomes for a period of time, or let's say we're not measuring the myokines appropriately or the inflammatory markers. We just are not identifying it from a clinical.
You are totally correct, because one of the commonest things about metabolically healthy obesity is that these individuals tend to be younger, right? And we know for a fact that as we age, the chances that you are staying metabolically healthy are diminishing almost linearly. even if your weight does not increase. So definitely, it seems to be it is not a shield against the metabolic abnormalities that is a permanent shield, right? It's just a temporary shield that it's exactly what you said. Your body, because of your age or your other functional capacities, has the ability to kind of withstand or mask the metabolic complications of excess weight and fat.
If you were
But
to,
let me touch.
yes,
I'm sorry. I just remember you mentioned also the rapidity at which we put gain or
the period. Yes, the
yeah.
period in which you
So
gain.
we
And the
don't
period
really have a very good. We don't have good studies that made people gain the same amount of weight with different rates, right? Because in a study like that, in order to be able to get a good answer to your question, you would have to have the same amount of weight gain with different rates, so in different time frames, right? But we do not have studies like that. What we do have, however, is the opposite. So we have studies that compared what happens if you lose the same amount of weight with different rates. So lose it fast or lose it slow, right?
yes,
And generally, these studies suggest that if you look acutely, so if you look at on the day that you reach the target weight loss, then losing it slow is generally better, right? But this is a little bit of a confounding interpretation of the data because you do not allow the body to stabilize at that new lower body weight. If you do that, so if you do the measurements after 1 month of stabilization at that new lower body weight, then it doesn't really matter whether you lose it fast or slow. For all intents and purposes, all the metabolic effects of weight loss are the same, no matter how fast or slow you lost it. And if anything, just as a last point to this point, we have data to suggest that people who for some reason lose weight initially at a faster rate are those who are more successful in long-term weight loss. Whether it's biological, whether it's something else, we do not know the mechanisms. But this observation comes again and again, that rapid initial weight loss predicts longer success.
I was so hoping you were going to say that. And remind me, that came out of, was that it's the ABC? Was it
I think so. And also the Look Ahead trial
it was
had
the
the
Look
same.
Ahead trial. It was the Look Ahead
Yes, and
trial.
several others. I think, it is remarkable to say that the rate at which you lose weight in the first 1 month or 2 months of a diet predicts what you do 4 and 8 years later. But because what I mean is that in the first month or 2 months of a diet, everybody is excited, right? So there is no issue of compliance over there because you can easily say that compliance is a major factor that predicts weight loss success. And that's true. 2 of the main predictors of weight loss success is compliance to the diet and then the initial rate of weight loss. So the initial rate of weight loss must be something that has to do with the biology, right? Because everybody is excited and they're very compliant to the diet in the first few weeks.
And this is all without medication, because
yes.
When you use a GLP-1s or GIP, some of these dual agonists, and I'm sure that I know that they will have multiple generations of these agents coming out. I wonder where that plays a role, because the recidivism rate, the regain weight of individuals just in general who struggle with obesity is, it's over 80%, right? It's even higher than that.
Yes, it varies, but generally it's not satisfactory because if it were, we would have treated the problem, right?
Yeah.
So clearly weight loss drugs, and especially these GLP-1 agonists and the dual agonists, kind of help quite a lot. And actually, results for these dual agonists suggest that you can reach, bariatric surgery levels of weight loss, really. The point is that, you need to get these drugs forever, meaning that if you stop taking these drugs, you go back to your initial weight trajectory. And I think that there is some studies published recently on clinical practice and real life effectiveness. And it seems that, like with most other medications, the majority of patients are just not compliant to their medications, even if it has to do with, these GLP-1 and GIP agonists. And of
It is
course, you have to take
fascinating.
into account the cost, right?
Yes. And that is,
Which
of
brings
course,
also then the other question of insurance and politics, because if we consider obesity as a disease, globally speaking, and then these medications need to be reimbursed by the insurance companies, then this would bring most national economies to their knees. We have 1.8 billion people who struggle with excess weight globally, right? So there are a lot of other factors involved when you talk about how to treat obesity medically.
yes. And if one of the other things that we haven't spoken about is the quality of the weight loss.
Mm.
Rapid weight loss typically seems to be lower quality. It is lean tissue as well as fat tissue. And I'm curious from your work and some of the things that you've been involved in, ideally, if you were to think, okay, based on evidence, how would I personally design a diet? How would you do that?
Yeah. So let me just say something about the composition of weight loss, right? When we lose weight, generally speaking, it's about 75% fat and 25% lean mass. What this means is that if you lose 10 kilos, about 7.5 kilos is fat mass and about 2.5 is lean mass. Out of those 2.5, most but not all is muscle, but not all. Okay. So when we say lean mass, is not just muscle. Lean mass is everything else other than fat and water and bone. Now, in terms of rapid weight loss, you're right. When we lose weight rapidly, it seems that we tend to lose more lean mass. But this is what happens if you measure people body composition acutely. If you allow them to stabilize it up at that new lower body weight, then these differences are actually minimized. And I'm not sure if they are clinically significant anymore.
Say that again. That's a very important point.
Yeah.
Say
So,
that again.
if you do your body composition measurements at the end of the weight loss treatment, where people are just coming out of their negative energy balance, right? A lot of the changes in body composition that you see also have to do with water fluxes around the body. So they are not really true. When you repeat those measurements 1 month later, when you have stabilized those people at their new lower body weight, then the composition of lost tissue doesn't differ that much between slow and fast weight loss.
That is it's just interesting because oftentimes, even in the literature, we think about rapid weight loss being extremely negative for muscle.
Well, correct, but that's what I mentioned, that this probably is not true.
Which is incredible to think about. The next obvious question is, how good at actually measuring skeletal muscle and differentiating between lean mass are we?
Yeah, we don't really have that good of methods. If you really want to be very specific about muscle, you would probably have to resort to methods including either CT, like computed tomography, or magnetic resonance imaging, and you would have to do it at the whole body level, right? So you have to scan head to toe, because muscle is an organ that is not anatomically defined like your heart, right? Muscle is a tissue that is interspersed in various parts of our bodies, right? So you would have to scan the whole body, and that would give you the best, let's say, measure of muscle mass. Most studies that we do in nutrition research and obesity treatment, we use techniques such as bioelectrical impedance analysis, which kind of tries to take advantage of the fact that fat tissue is a good insulator, whereas the rest of the body is a better insulator. So it kind of gives you a guesstimate of body composition. We also use another type of scanning with dual X-ray absorptiometry, which gives you, fat mass and lean mass, but it cannot separate muscle mass. So I would say that the majority of the studies that you see out there, they do not use a particularly robust method for muscle mass.
What do you see as the problem in that?
And of not being able to quantify muscle mass, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, clearly you could argue that if I cannot get a good measurement of muscle mass, then I do not get a good estimate of what is the effect of weight loss on body composition. And it goes back to what you said, right? The quality of the weight loss. Because if you lose more muscle, theoretically your resting metabolic rate would go down. You would have alteration in the amount of all these myokines that you have circulating in your bloodstream, and this could, of course, affect metabolic function. But of course, we have some, let's say, indirect ways that we can probe that, meaning that you can actually measure myokines, right, in the bloodstream.
Are you guys doing that a lot in Copenhagen? Which, first of all, I know that you are. And if I could, maybe you'll put in a good word for me at Bente Penderson's lab.
Yeah.
But over here,
Bente does though, yeah.
Yes, she does. I was actually trying to set you up for a softball. I was trying to pitch you a ball. I was going to see if you were going to bite on this. Or
I don't even know what softball is.
Yeah. Soccer, football, none of those things. Complete terrible joke. If we don't do a good job at, number one, identifying and quantifying skeletal muscle mass loss as well as gain, in my mind, it stands to reason this has been a huge disservice. I know that is not scientific, but then we will fail to see, number one, the potential importance and the potential impact the loss or gain of muscle is in overall health in general. You and I were talking about something else, and 10 years ago, when I was in fellowship, it was just the start of getting better at identifying and measuring skeletal muscle mass with CT, MRI, and that was 10 years ago.
Yeah, but these pieces of instruments are very expensive. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but generally we do the best we can do. And the majority of studies, I would say, that focus on the dietary treatment of obesity, they are not so muscle-centric, to put it this way. So, you have to allocate your resources in a way that is equitable for the outcomes that you want to measure, right? I'm guessing that you would have to do a specific study that focuses on the amount of muscle mass in order to engage and utilize those techniques that are more accurate. Still, muscle mass in itself doesn't necessarily will tell you everything, right? Because you have muscle function on top of muscle mass. You have fiber composition, right? So you can have the same amount of muscle, but depending on the composition of these myocytes, the function and their metabolic effects might be different. So, I mean, we see that in professional athletes, right? Whether they are endurance trained or resistance trained, they have different metabolic profiles and they have different changes in their metabolism during their training. So clearly, mass is an important factor. It's definitely not the only thing that matters, I would say, for health. Right? You have to take into account how that mass functions.
When it comes to health, what works for someone else may not work for you because we are unique. We have unique genetics, habits, and health goals. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Inside Tracker. You've heard me talk about it before. Inside Tracker is a way to get your blood work, which shows you exactly what your body needs and gives you a personalized plan for strength, hormone, balance, overall health, you name it, they get it done. There are plenty of companies that just look at blood or just look at DNA, but I use Inside Tracker because it's the only one that looks at everything, including your blood results, DNA, fitness tracker inputs, and other health information. It's a 360-degree analysis that provides incredible visibility on what is going on inside your body. Inside Tracker analytics centers on what calls your 10 health span categories. This includes a whole host of things like fitness, hormone health, you name it. When you become a member, you'll get an individual score for each of your health span categories, and you'll learn what you need to do to drive your score high. Your personalized recommendations will include things like food, supplements, exercise, and sleep tips. And by tracking your health span category scores and blood results, you'll be able to confirm what is working and what is not. Now, it's time to start your personalized health journey, especially because Inside Tracker is dropping prices by 30% for this year's Black Friday sale. Get after it. Year-long membership plans will start at $104. You can also purchase discounted blood tests, DNA, biological age analysis. It's everything that you need to fast track your health. Mark your calendars, because instead of buying that new Tupperware or that new coffee mug, get your blood work done. Starts Wednesday, November 27th. And you want to act fast because you want to make this happen. Go to insidetracker.com to get your health journey started. That's insidetracker.com and use the code Dr. Lyon. Do you think the oversight in skeletal muscle, or the lack of skeletal muscle, is in part due to its complexity because it is heterogeneous versus adipose tissue, which is homogeneous? And I'm just referring to circle back to what Faidon was saying about muscle mass. No two people have the same fiber type, composition, intramuscular fat. It's a very complex tissue, and the composition of the fiber throughout the body potentially can be different.
Yeah, not potentially. We know that different fiber.
You were the one who taught me to speak like this, to not speak in absolutes. This is your fault.
But this we know because we have actually taken biopsies from different tissues around the body of the same individuals, and you see that there are differences, let's say, between the fiber composition of your soleus versus glute versus gastrocnemius versus so on and so forth. There is also differences in the rates of protein synthesis and all those things. Whether or not these are clinically significant, we do not know, right? But statistically, you can see differences anyway.
And maybe we're just too early. I think that we're just too early in the research.
Yes. The other thing is that, as you said, on average, you're right that adipose tissue, at least white adipose tissue, subcutaneous white adipose tissue, is a more homogeneous tissue compared to muscle, right? But you have visceral adipose tissue, you have adipose tissue or fat inside organs. So what I mean is that, yes, probably on average, the remark that muscle is much more complex is true. Now, if you approach the diet, right, which you have to approach the whole body, you cannot really approach the diet in an organ-specific way. Typically, people get obese and this affects all organs. And the same thing, as they lose weight, this affects all organs. So, if you go back to the 30,000 feet view and try to see, what can we do, for obesity? We have at least ideas about the characteristics of a healthy diet. And again, I'm using the term healthy because I think that obesity treatment has over-focused on the scale rather than on the outcomes. What I mean is that, would we care about obesity if it were not for the increased risk of disease? No. Obesity would not even be considered by the Health Organization, right? Because obesity is defined as the amount of excess fat accumulation that may impair health. If it was not for the complications of obesity, we would not mind so much. Nobody would care about aesthetics, right? And historically, if you see this, there was a time where obesity was considered a favorable trait in humans. But anyway, so we know that some characteristics of the diet that are conducive to good health are, be prudent in calories, have variety, eat a mostly plant-based diet, but with enough protein. And not vegan.
I'm just kidding.
So the Mediterranean diet, I'm from Greece, right?
Yes.
And we like the Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean diet is a mostly plant-based diet, but we eat meat, we eat protein, we eat dairy. So, I would say eat everything in moderation is a trick here, right? So we know most of the characteristics of a healthy diet. But yet it's very difficult to adhere to that diet because that requires that you go to the grocery shop. It's not convenient with everyday life to go to shop and cook and do all those things at home. It's much more easy to get a ready-made food and heat it in the microwave and eat it. So it's really tricky. And of course, I know you're interested in exercise, right? We know that doing exercise or exercising, being active is good. And what is the best exercise? Well, it's the one you do. That's very simple. The answer to that
Not
question
the one
is
that
very
Faidon
simple.
does. This guy runs. He just runs.
No, not like me. No, I don't. Yeah. But what I mean is that it doesn't matter if you lift, if you run, if you cycle, if you swim, as long as you do something, right? Or you walk your dog. All these are behaviors that we know are healthy. We know that they help you maintain a healthy weight or reduce a little bit the excess weight that you may have. We definitely know that they will keep you healthier for longer, which is important, right? Because it doesn't really matter if you have 1, 2, 3 more kilos in your body, as long as this doesn't affect you. And you can still go around and do the things that you want to do with your life.
I agree with you. And for history's sake, you guys listening, again, Faidon and I have known each other for over 10 years. When we think about the percentage of, and we've worked together. Actually, we've worked on multiple studies together. He's much more published. I think I have 2 papers and a book chapter published, but I did write a book that did well, which you, I think, pretty much.
Congratulations. I remember that. Yep.
Yes, because I think that you refused to review it because it was for general consumption and not in the White Tower of academia. I'm totally kidding. You guys, I am kidding. But our perspective on muscle, I think, is very similar. Although I would say I tend to be very dogmatic in my thinking. And I definitely recognize this if I were to really think about where does obesity, where do these problems begin? For me, it's muscle. I appreciate my biases. From a dietary perspective, if one were to set up from a giving actual number perspective, and there is variation. For example, Faidon does a lot of endurance training. He weightlifts 2 to 3 days a week. At least he did. And he's a creature of habit. I'm assuming you still do that. Right?
Yeah.
You go to the gym, you spend like 3 hours training, and then you're ready to go to bed you train at night. It's a whole thing. The listener wants to know, how do they design a diet? And let's say they're very prudent about protein. We know that 0.8 grams per kg is the minimum to prevent a deficiency. It's probably not enough to support aging. One probably requires more if they are in a catabolic condition or even with obesity.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So now, let me just say, of course, there is a lot of different ways that you can design a diet. So I believe that, if you think about drugs versus food, right? Drug is a very specific compound. It's one compound that targets one specific metabolic pathway, let's say, in the body. Diet or food has like thousands, if not millions, of compounds that act on everywhere and interact with each other, right? So each one affects the effects of the other. So I like to think that there is no ideal diet. There is no perfect diet. And when I say that to people, most people get sad and disappointed, but I try to give it a positive spin. In what sense? That there is so many degrees of freedom for you to go out, choose, experiment, and find out the diet that works for you. As you said, I like pasta. My diet is 70% carbs. I've measured it. So I'm 70% carbs, 20% fat, and 10% protein. But I cover my protein needs because of all this exercise that I do. I eat a lot of calories, right?
And you definitely have to expand on that.
Yeah, what I want to say is that I have found a diet that works for my lifestyle.
And I think your body type, though, you're very lean.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there is a variation, just as some people do better on a higher protein diet, which I am one of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Some people do better on different diets, and that's the positive spin for me. That diet has a lot of degrees of freedom, and you have to find a person who is a little bit knowledgeable, like me, you, or whoever, and help you identify what are, let's say, the mistakes that you may do. Because, sometimes when you know a lot of things, like on this, if you are on the academic side of things, you take some knowledge as granted, and that's not true. I can see that, whenever you have a new input of students, we also have to kind of deal with all the ideas that they come in the university, right? And then I get to remind myself of, oh my God, how is it possible that, you don't know this? But that's the reality out there for the general public. So, you have to find somebody who is a little bit knowledgeable, and they can help you identify some errors that you may be doing, and then try to experiment and trial and error. It's all about trial and error and finding something that works for you. That's how I managed to do it anyway.
Well, you're also very evidence informed, evidence-based, and you're evidence-based, but you're evidence-informed. For you to get 10% of your calories from protein, the reality is you counterbalance that by your activities extreme. I think that you're also at a standing desk. You have enough.
Yeah. Well, everybody in Denmark has a stand. Right. This desk that goes up and down. Yes.
Well, we don't have that here in the studio. Denmark, everybody moves around. And by the way,
especially, well, let me just correct you. In Copenhagen, everybody moves around, and because bicycles is so much into the culture. So I bike to work every day, right?
Yes.
Back and forth, in addition to the other stuff.
But
everybody does that.
Everyone does.
But rural Denmark is not the same.
But again, from a larger view, Copenhagen is really the Mecca. It's like the Harvard outside of the US, especially for anything metabolic, exercise related, and skeletal muscle, and just really this nutritional perspective. However, one thing that you have to take into account is their lifestyle is not an American lifestyle. People
of course, absolutely.
So the perspective is, that is what the exposure is. The individuals could get away with a lower protein diet because they counterbalance with a way of life that is extraordinarily active. And you're
but as I mentioned, if you think 10% of calories over 3 or 3,500 calories on a daily basis, this is about 300 calories from protein. Divide that by 4, right? You get about 90 something,
which is low. Right? Well, from my perspective, is low, and you and I definitely.
But I'm weighing 70 kilos, so I'm eating about 1.3. You know what I mean?
I do.
So the percent of the calories seems or sounds low, but the actual amount is not low. And I'm lifting for maintaining, right? I'm not weightlifting to be a bodybuilder. So
you could be if you decide not
clearly, to. Clearly, if your target is that, then yes, of course, you need much more protein. There's no question about it.
If someone wants to build muscle, how much protein?
Well, I think that you should go upper of 1.6, but definitely no. I don't think there's any need for more than 2.2, 2.3. I think that's where you saturate the system. And all the studies that we have so far, where they measure muscle protein synthesis in response to different types of exercise and different forms of feeding amino acids, insulin, and all those things, the response is always the same. You have a linear increase and then a plateau. So there is definitely a point where you saturate the system, and then any more than that, you will obviously either burn it for energy or store it as fat.
And
so you should not overdo it. That's what I mean.
And I want to pause there and interject. What he's saying is that if your goal is muscle hypertrophy or repair, skeletal muscle repair, anything above 2.2 grams per kg might not be necessary, right? And that's definitely the upper limit. From a overall calorie perspective and an overall intake, there's no downside. And Faidon and I may disagree here, but 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, I find, is safe. I think it's easy to do. Assuming
so 2 grams per kilo approximately, yeah.
At the upper limit.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that that
Oh no,
an issue?
there is no downside as long as your total energy intake is kept
Yes.
like under control. No problem at all. There are no side effects really if you're healthy and you don't have any sort of kidney problems.
Correct. And you had mentioned insulin and these other hormones. Where do you think that plays a role from a obesity perspective? Because if insulin and other hormonal responses to food play a role in the carbohydrate insulin model, do you think that, say, having a diet high in carbohydrates would be obesogenic, or is it a genetic and activity related question?
So, I mean, I obviously don't have the exact answer to your question, but let me just say that, we are talking now about building muscle, but if you are talking about building muscle in the context of losing weight, so losing weight and building muscle, then that is very difficult to do. So you have to actually be going to the gym almost daily for like 15 hours a week. I only know 1 or 2 studies in the literature with professional athletes where they were losing weight because they were trying to make competition weight, right? And they were training about 15 hours a week. And only in this population, under this condition, do they manage to gain muscle while they are losing weight. For all intents and purposes, for the average person, I would say that when you lose weight, you cannot avoid losing muscle. You can minimize that muscle loss by exercising and eating more protein, but you will not be able to avoid a complete loss of muscle. And now the protein that you have in your diet as a percentage of your calories should go up if you are calorie restricting yourself, right? So me, because I'm eating 3,500 calories a day, I can get away with 10% protein. The person who is actively in calorie restriction and eating 1,000 calories a day to lose weight, the percent protein should be 20 or 30.
If
Right?
it was higher, remember the protein sparing fasts? Do you remember those, the modified protein sparing fasts?
Yeah. All the commercial VLCD products, the very low energy diet
Yes.
products, they're like the Nupo and I don't know what you have in the States.
Mm-hmm.
But all these now are about 50% protein,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you eat only 800 calories a day, and protein is the most important nutrient to match and to meet your body's needs. So as a percent of calories, the less you eat, the more you need.
And then aging as well.
Yes, with aging as well. And that's true. Aging has been associated with a little bit of an anabolic resistance, as we call it, meaning that, and going back to your insulin question, right? So the main effect of insulin is that it kind of stops muscle breakdown. So when you exercise, you increase muscle breakdown, really. That's the effect of resistance exercise or weightlifting on muscle. But then when you eat after that exercise, the insulin, what it does is that it stops muscle breakdown. And then the additional protein that you have eaten is being used to stimulate protein synthesis, so your balance becomes positive, right? So it seems that aging is associated with a little bit of anabolic resistance, meaning that for the same amount of protein, people who are older, they do not respond very robustly in terms of muscle protein synthesis. What you can do to circumvent that problem is to feed them a little bit more protein. So if you flood the system a little bit more, then you get the same response that you would get. So that's easily solvable with aging.
When your students are coming in, again, you're a full professor. When your students are coming in, are you seeing trends? Are you seeing trends of incorrect thinking or perspectives?
Oh, yeah.
And what are those?
Yeah. Well, instead of, rather than incorrect thinking, because again, I would say that I can never be 100% sure in research, right? But there is definitely thinking that is not supported by the weight of the evidence, right? Things like eating both carbs and protein in the same meal. Things about what the effects of exercise are. Things about when you should eat, like the time of the day.
Tell me. We all want to hear. We're all dying to hear. I just want to hear the the highlights where it's not supported by evidence?
Well, I wouldn't say it's not supported by evidence, but for instance, there is this idea that, let's say, eating earlier, right, or breakfast skipping or breakfast eating is associated with more or less body weight and obesity, right? So generally, if you go out in the population, you will see that people who typically, habitually tend to avoid breakfast, they are more obese, or they have greater body weight. So this has led to the assumption that breakfast is important to kind of treat obesity. However, if you take people who are habitual not breakfast eaters like myself, and you put them in a study and you tell them now start eating breakfast, we gain weight. We don't lose weight. So breakfast is bad in that scenario, right?
So complicated. Yes.
So that's what I mean. So observation in the population is very different from what happens when you actually put it to the test. Because there's a lot of other factors that could be responsible for that relationship you saw. Another thing is that, we know also that people who tend to eat or to spread their calories around the day have better body weight than those who pack more of their calories in fewer meals, right? So that's why we say it's better to eat more meals rather than pack all your calories in a single meal or 2 meals, right? You've heard that, I guess.
I'm trying to think what I hear. I mean, I have seen people try to, I don't know. I don't know if I've heard that some people try to do 1 meal a day or, I'm not sure.
Generally, however, I think that at least in my students, because that's who you asked about, the general perception is that eating fewer calories spread out evenly throughout the day is better for body weight homeostasis. But again, when we put this to the test and we bring people and we randomize them on one month to eat 1 meal, all calories of the day in 1 meal versus spread out in 6 meals, we do not see any differences. Again, kind of mute, right?
Yeah. And I just want to put a little caveat on here. What he's talking about is really thinking about things in population base. This would not be, for example, that would not be a strategy, a 1 meal a day kind of a thing would not be a strategy I would use for an older person, someone who's trying to build muscle, someone who's trying to protect muscle. But again, this circles back to the beginning of the conversation that I had with Faidon is there are population studies. We're doing the best we can. But when it comes to individuals, there's variation.
Clearly, and it also will depend on the characteristics of the person, right? Because we know that even if you prescribe the same diet and exercise regimen for a group of 100 people, you will get 100 different responses, right? Depending on your outcome, these responses may vary from a little improvement to a lot of improvement, but for some outcomes they may vary from improvement to getting worse. So, the variability between people to the same diet and exercise is humongous. Some of it could be genetic. Some of it could be compliance to your instructions, right? Because people also are not particularly compliant. And we see that when we bring people in the lab and we actually house them in the lab, so we are responsible for feeding them, for telling them, now rest, now hop on the treadmill, now rest, now eat. The variability is much less than what we see in real life. Right?
I didn't know that. The variability is much less when we study that. You mean their response to exercise? Because there's some data out there that talks about exercise non-responders. There's
Yeah. What I mean is that, of course, you see that in the lab as well. It's just the range of response is smaller because you take the compliance part out of the equation. Clearly, if you just prescribe an exercise treatment in real life, then compliance to that exercise regimen will be a big factor in mediating the individual differences in response. But when we take that out of the equation, we still see some level of individual responses, right?
What about exercise that you are seeing your younger students come in thinking that is potentially not following the literature?
Well, unfortunately, most of my teaching is in the nutrition field. So my students don't feel strong about exercise. And that's, I think it's a pity, because you know me, I mean, I'm 50% diet, 50% exercise. And I think that, these are two sides of the coin, that you cannot consider the effects of exercise without knowing what you are eating, and vice versa. You cannot evaluate the effects of eating without knowing whether or not I exercise.
Yeah.
Right.
From a nutrition perspective, I'm sure you get ketogenic diet questions, and even with the energy balance model and the carbohydrate-insulin model, where does a ketogenic diet play a role, and does it prove or disprove one or the other?
Yeah. So ketogenic diet, and if you mean by strictly ketogenic, so I eat less than 20 or 50 grams of carbs per day, these are very, very effective diets in inducing weight loss. So actually, if you do a real true ketogenic diet, you cannot, even if you feed people, you cannot maintain their weight, because they tend to lose weight. Of course, the majority of this initial weight loss is more water rather than fat, for instance, right? But the point is that these diets, they are not diets that you can maintain in the long term. And by long term, I mean years or for the rest of your life. And that is a problem whenever we talk about diets. So it is not difficult to make people lose weight in short term. What is difficult is to change their habits so that they can do that effortlessly for the rest of their lives. That's the big obstacle that we have with the treatment of obesity, right? You mentioned that before. If we take food away, people lose weight. Thank you very much. But we cannot, this is not life, right?
Yeah, it is certainly. When everyone was together, was there a discussion about muscle, about exercise? I know that this is, and I bring this up because you said diet is 50% and exercise is 50%, but they are tackling the pathogenesis of obesity. But where was the conversation about muscle and exercise?
Well, back then, I think that again, where we were mainly focusing on diet and weight loss and obesity in regards to diet rather than exercise. But to put it this way, you cannot over-exercise yourself out of a bad diet in the same way that you cannot, eat your way out of being sedentary. There is no question.
Let's say that again. That's fascinating. I don't think we've ever heard anyone say that you cannot eat your way out of being sedentary.
Yeah, meaning that if you are sedentary, it doesn't mean that you can follow like a prudent diet and then be in optimal health, right? That's what I meant by that. In the same way that you cannot eat whatever you want to and then just exercise yourself out of it. So you have to pay attention to both. Clearly, there is no question that being active helps you stay healthier for longer. And that's important, I think, as a message. Because aside from what the scale says and all those things, as we grow older, we realize that, we want to be healthy, we want to be functional, and we want to be independent. And exercise and being physically active is a critical component of functional independence as you age. There is no question about it.
And I know that you will tell me it's whatever anyone will do, and that's a kind of exercise. How do you place the importance of endurance, resistance, high intensity interval training? Where do you think about that from a health, longevity, obesity prevention standpoint?
Well, all of these things that you mentioned are probably different, because from let's say from the energy balance perspective, clearly endurance exercise predominates, simply because for the amount of time that you spend during exercise, you burn more calories with endurance than resistance exercise, right? At least acutely during the exercise session, which again is not that much, meaning that if you see how many calories you burn by running for an hour, it's 500 calories if you run at a moderate to high pace. 500 calories is, a slice of pizza. So, or a Danish. So it's really disappointing to see how many calories you. But the point with exercise is that it puts you in a positive mindset, right? And in a positive feedback circle that, you exercise, you feel better, you pay attention to what you eat, and then you keep this going, and then you enter a healthier way of living. I think that's the main value of exercise. Now, again, if your main focus is calories, then I would focus predominantly on endurance type of exercises. If your main focus is to build muscle or to maintain functional capacity, then definitely resistance training is important. So for aging, I would say I would put more emphasis on weightlifting and resistance training rather than endurance training, because this is mostly what you need to maintain your functional capacity.
And that's ultimately what people want. They want to age well.
Yeah, I think so too. Of course, I think so too. And you also mentioned the high-intensity interval exercise, which is a great way to exercise as long as you can do it. Of course, it's a way that you can reach your goals at a smaller amount of time, right? So it depends. Some people have more time to spend in the gym, some people have less time to spend in the gym. So with high-intensity interval exercise, you do not increase your biological ceiling. You just reach it faster.
Do you think that there is a biological ceiling?
Well, I think so. As long as you do not, if you are trying to maintain all other parameters the same, meaning that if you do not want to increase your weight, then yes, of course, there is a biological ceiling in terms of what you can achieve. And we can see that even as you said, in the response to exercise, right? We see some people who double or triple in capacity, and some of them who increase only by 10 or 20%, and they do the same amount of exercise. So there's definitely some sort of ceiling in all of the responses. The human body is not endless.
I absolutely agree with you. And, there are foundational principles that everyone, from my perspective, should be doing. I think that
I agree.
Yeah.
And we know most of that stuff, right?
Yes.
We know most of that stuff.
When you were in this room and you're seeing researchers, and I'm not sure if there were any clinicians in there, but obviously if the smartest people in the world are struggling to have these conversations, how do you suggest that we, as science communicators, as academics, as clinicians, as trainers, as coaches, communicate the complexities to the public?
Well, I'm sorry, let me just mute my phone because it just told me that I need to get my medicine.
Also, by the way, we're wrapping up anyway. You want me to ask you that again?
I remember that.
Okay. Medicine. Okay. I'll talk about that later.
I didn't tell you I was in Beijing, and then I was running like crazy and exercising like crazy, and I got an exercise-induced asthma attack. So I was hospitalized in China.
You didn't tell me that.
Yeah, that was that was a surreal experience. So I had to go to the hospital like for 6 consecutive days.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But the Chinese were really detailed about how to treat it. Anyway, so now I have been prescribed an inhaler.
Oh.
Like inhaled bronchodilators for like 3 months.
Oh my God.
Okay, so going back to how do we communicate, I think that what is important is to avoid being absolute and to avoid placing focus on a single topic, a single finding, a single food ingredient, a single diet. Because, focusing on a leaf or a leaf, it makes you lose the tree, let alone the forest. Because that's what, the public discussions typically take the form of, right? We focus on just a small, tiny little thing, and then we forget the whole idea of the forest behind that leaf. So, I think that taking a perspective that is, trial and error, and, we know basic things about healthy diet and healthy lifestyle, but we tend to not even doing those because we are focused on other things.
That makes sense. And I have one last question. And that is, where do you think the future is going? the future of obesity research?
Well, I wish I knew, because had I known, I would be very successful in getting new grants in the future, right?
Yeah.
But, I hopefully, now we are entering an era where we have big data. So because you have huge studies around the world with thousands of people, which are deeply phenotyped and genotyped. And, now with the advent of AI and all these artificial intelligence systems, we might be able to mine this data in a more effective way that can possibly give us some ideas or some better ideas about, possible causative factors or possible ways to treat obesity. But it's not that I will see that this will go away in relatively fast, simply because, again, obesity is so multifactorial that is very difficult to kind of understand all of these factors in a comprehensive way. So on one side, that's good for me because I will have work to do in the future. Again, on the other side, I don't want this to sound as pessimistic, in a sense that, again, we know a lot about what you can do right now already to be healthy, even if you maintain 1, 2, 3 more excess kilos. So you should not be focusing on the scale so much. You should be focusing on your health and on all those other aspects that make living worthwhile, right? So I think that's an optimistic note to end this discussion with you, Gabrielle.
Well, Faidon, thank you so much for sharing time and your brilliance. You are an amazing human and a phenomenal academic. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for your kind words.